Okay, earlier this morning, just a little while ago, as a matter of fact, we were talking with somebody who I really respect, talking about getting involved in the process. And you are invited to do just that this morning as well. During the session, we are very, very pleased to bring you a little get-togethers with politicians that are in the areas of making a difference. One of which is the minority leader, Aaron Johanson. Rep. Johanson joins us live on Monday mornings during the session and is here this morning. Morning, how you doing? Nice to see you again. Did you have a wet weekend like all of us did?
I did.
Yeah. We're all mopping up. Look, I know that there's a lot of people that would, if they took a look at the recap of some of the main legislative measures and see that something that they were against failed, they breathe this big sigh of relief and they go about their business. This is the time of the year, and I think we started this last week, where I get the most nervous. So can we talk about some of that today and how that works?
Sure. I think the warning signal that you sent to your listeners is right on. I mean, just when we start to all breathe a sigh of relief, I always tell people the best time to breathe a sigh of relief is after the legislature has adjourned and there's no special session, because then you know it's definitely a done deal versus what might come back to live and be resuscitated. It's
like Shark Week is the number one thing on the Discovery Channel, and the one movie Jaws is. It's just when you thought it was safe to go in the water, it's not. So I'm wondering if that's just kind of a pretty good analogy, because
it is.
What we've got here is a lot of people going, oh, well, I don't have to worry about that anymore.
It is. No, I think the one thing that makes it really good this session, maybe a little better than in others, and maybe a little less reason to worry, but still reason to worry, is that at least in the House, many of the people who are now in power are the people who very much criticized this gut and replace that you talked about in the earlier segments. And so, to do so now in a wide-scale fashion would end up
pretty hard.
Yeah.
Okay, now, I also want to ask you, and I don't know if this is my imagination or not, but the disparaging difference in the House percentage-wise of Democrats and Republicans would make you think that there's no debate going on. But it looks to me as though common sense has prevailed with some measures, at least, particularly with a bunch of them that we're going to raise our cost of living through tax increases.
Oh, agreed. I mean, if you looked at the beginning of this session, I mean, if it breathed or existed, it was probably considered for some type of tax based on a lot of the bills that we saw in the beginning. The great thing is the process winnows it out. And because there is some uncertainty in the House, I think part of what is happening is you're seeing the first fruits of this coalition government. A lot of these tax and fee increases, whether it's on marriage licenses, vital records, dietary supplements, single-use checkout bags, all these things have failed to pass the House, which is a great achievement, I think, for the people in terms of making sure that we try to at least take a stab at reducing the cost of living, or at least not exacerbating it, which is typically what the legislature does.
Yeah, very good point. By the way, you are invited to join us this morning. If there's a particular bill or a concern that you may have, now would be to get a great chance to get Rep. Johanson's attention and also some guidance on how to impart that position you have to your leaders, because I've kind of been reiterating each time we've met the importance of, if you hear something, don't just assume that, well, somebody else more motivated than me is going to convey my thinking. You guys like Al Villahermosa joined me in the last segment are a quintessential example of somebody who actually will sometimes miss work because they'll come down to the ledge and see what's going on.
That's true.
Okay, so let's talk about some things that are good and some things that are not so good. For instance, I know that at least on the top of this, that the minimum wage bill looks like moving forward. And I know there are a lot of people on both sides of the fence about this. Where is this going, and what does it look like to you at this moment?
Sure, there are two different iterations. The minimum wage bill that moved out of the Senate is akin to the governor's bill, which ties the minimum wage increase to the consumer price index increases, and after a while
it just becomes
becomes automatic. I'm glad that didn't move out of the House, because I think that's a particularly disadvantageous one, because you really can't control costs. Automatic adjustments will just keep going up because the consumer price index rarely goes down.
No, as a matter of fact, don't hold your breath for it going down. Yeah.
So, if you're a small business, I mean, it would just be unreasonable to keep planning for all these unforeseen cost increases in your labor costs. I think what passed out of the House, while not perfect, was probably a little better version. What it did was it would set minimum wage adjustment, some increases at differing years it would increase it. But it also paired it to a lower unemployment insurance rate contribution from employers. And so what the House tried to do, and it'll be helpful to hear from the business community whether or not that actually bears out, the House's version tries to offset some of the costs that would be accrued by the increased minimum wages by offsetting it with what employers have to pay into the UI fund.
And that is what a couple of employers mentioned to me, and say that this is really a red herring. It's kind of spooky because what they're offering is, why are they offering a way to cut something over here in order to increase something over there? In other words, are they kidding? Because it's still going to cost me more money to do business.
And it's probably a sugar coating on a pill. It tries to make it a little less bitter, but I think that's where we really need the business community to come out and to testify at the Capitol that just because you're sugarcoating a bitter pill doesn't make it less bitter.
I mentioned a moment ago that there's a bunch of things got killed that were going to cost us more money, but there are still a bunch that are still on the table. And it's like I was listening to a program earlier this morning. On one of Mike Gallagher's guests says it's like putting lipstick on a pig. I mean, it still is a pig. Yeah. So what are some of the things that are still causing concern on both sides of the aisle as far as things that maybe should die a natural death that haven't?
One of the things that is a most pervasive tax increase that most people won't be able to avoid, and it's one of the more difficult ones for people to actually see, is the House passed out a bill. It was something that most of the minority members voted against, but it would be an increase in the barrel tax. Now, that's not what it's called. If you look at the title of the bill, it's relating to wildlife conservation, and there would be a percentage of this unspecified increase in the barrel tax that would go towards wildlife conservation.
For those that don't know what a barrel tax is?
It's a gas tax.
Yeah.
So, but it would be leveraged. The tax would be applied before you actually fill up at the pump. So part of what's so insidious about it is that when you fill up at the pump, you just think, well, my gas is higher. You don't necessarily think my gas is higher because the state is taxing me more. So because you can't see it, it's harder for you, to call your legislators and say, hey, you raised the gas tax, and I don't like paying more of my money at the pump. Yeah,
and we, of course, are looking at this at the city, the city council, or rather the mayor's proposed, putting up a 5 cents a gallon tax. We get to a point where, and let me ask you this on sort of a rider. Tesoro's announced the number of layoffs and the number of job losses are going to be. And we look like being pretty vulnerable. And that means that there's some other energy-related bills that are going to be leaning on the Tesoro situation to either get passed or to fail. What are some of the good and maybe some of the bad things that are out there about energy?
Well, the gas tax would be one of them. There's certainly some concerns over a bill that relates to divestiture for businesses that employ 100 or more people, what you can and cannot do when somebody else buys your business and when you divest it to them. I know that that's a major concern for folks who are looking at post-Tesoro. There are other bills that would change the composition of where there's an emergency sort of cleanup fund that much of the gas tax goes to right now, reallocating that towards different energy developments, clean energy developments. And so, there's a lot that revolves around the fossil fuel and gas industry.
Yeah. I'm really kind of concerned and more than worried about some other ones. Rep. Johanson's here. I'm getting some email, but remember, during the time that we do these live, quote, political shows, the only way you can get in with a question is to call in and not off the air, on the air. Now, I got a bunch of stuff left for Rep. Johanson, but maybe you do too. And even if we're not talking about a bill that is near and dear to you, you can certainly ask about something that you're interested in, either furthering along or making sure it doesn't go further along. All right. As you know, the legislative session, second half is in full swing. And if you want to find out how to be a part of this, or just sort of find out how particular bills that may be of interest to you are traveling along or not, this is your opportunity to talk to Rep. Aaron Johanson, joining us live in the studio during the session on Monday mornings in this hour. Spread the word. Going to the phones. Let's go first. Bill in Waianae, you hang in there. Let's go first to Rob in Hawaii Kai. Good morning, Rob.
Hey, good morning. First, I want to thank Aaron for doing such a great job. He's a great member that does a tough job being the leader of the extreme minority. Anyway, I wanted to ask Aaron if he knew, could explain if the gas tax is a percentage of the cost of the gas, or is it a flat rate that's tacked onto the price that the gas station pays?
Sure. That's a good question, Rob. I think the way this particular bill was structured and why it's so dangerous, in my opinion, is it left it as a few certain cents applied as a tax prior to the selling to the gas stations. But because it's left blank, you don't know whether it's 5 cents, it could be 10 cents. And, part of what the legislature is so good at is marketing and advertising. They make a lot of the bills that are really the hardest hitting, most adversely impactful to the community, always wrapped up in something like wildlife conservation or something that just makes it harder.
How can you be opposed to, birds and the bees?
Right, and it works with a lot of my majority colleagues. Nobody wants to be against the environment or against wildlife. And so in this particular bill, it would apply a few cents increase whenever we apply the gas tax, which is pre-sale at the pump, and that's why I think it's so bad for consumers, because you don't get on your receipt. By the way, part of what you paid at the pump, this is what the state actually assessed you, and this is what it would be without the gas tax, which would be a lot cheaper. Part of the reason we have some of the most expensive gas in the country is because we have. I don't think it's the highest. I think it's the second highest gas tax in the nation, and that's not something that most people know. So most people just assume, well, it's the oil companies that are gouging me, or this is the price of paradise, and some of that factors in certainly as variables. But it's not the only reason. It's because the state is charging all of us a lot at the pump.
I agree, and the idea of the higher the price of gas goes, the more money they make.
Mm-hmm.
So when they could just take a flat fee of, let's just say, 75 cents, and if the price goes up and goes down, we would be one of the lowest in the nation, and it would help our shipping of our foods and everything that comes here and moving it around, as well as the gas tax to take people to work if they have a job.
No, that sounds like a great idea to me, and I wish that's something we would do. Unfortunately, most of government is predisposed to how much money can we get from whom and how often, as opposed to how can we just make an equitable, fair tax structure for everybody.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, Rob, thanks a lot. And I think what he brings up is a good idea. He and I both go to the same gas station out in Hawaii Kai, and I was talking to George Williamson there at that Chevron station, and he says, a lot of people take this increase out on me. I'm a dealer, and I got nothing to do with it. He says most of these gas stations, especially the small guys, they're making less per gallon than they ever did before because they're embarrassed about having to charge so much.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Bill. We go from Hawaii Kai to Waianae. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning. Good morning. Sorry about the voice. I'm suffering a cold. One thing that I tried to do a couple of years ago was get the gas companies to fight back by putting on their marquee how much they pay per gallon in state tax and federal tax, and I couldn't get that thing to go. The other thing is I want to please comment on the fact that the state legislature keeps robbing the funds that are supposed to be earmarked. For an example, in the last 2 years, the state and county has raised over an extra $120 million in the registration fees of cars that were supposed to be designated for the roads. Well, there ain't no road work, and they can't explain to me where that money's gone. The next one, of course, is that retirement fund, is how they rated it. Now, are we going to have to get a tax increase to put the money back that they wasted on their pet projects? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, you might expand that a little bit, Aaron, on how these, quote, special funds or assignments get mucked around with. I mean, if it's supposed to go to, hug the trees, then why would it be going to save the sewers?
Well, what you see in a lot of these bills, less so this session. In fact, there's been a lot more truer accounting. I don't necessarily agree with the application of the fee, but at least I'll give it to most of the authors this session that there's been greater transparency. Lots of times they will divert a percentage to whatever the specified purpose is in the special fund, but they'll put a lot of it into the general fund so that, they can just collect more revenue to use at their discretion. Now, I think some of the points that the caller brought up that are excellent and so true, which is why a lot of the minority caucus votes against these bills. In fact, the increase in registration fee as well as the increase in the vehicle weight tax, both bills that I voted no against consistently because precisely what the caller brought up.
I just got mine.
Yeah.
And if you voted for it, you'd be getting a big slap from this side.
You might be driving
terrible.
over driving over me with your truck.
Yeah, really.
Your newly expensive truck thanks to the registration fee increases.
That's right.
But it is a dramatic cost increase for most people that just for, the legislature would say for the privilege of driving, which, you need to drive to get to your job, you need to drive to raise your family, you need to drive to live. So that's the society that we've created, and you can't just impose things. And what's unfortunate, and the caller's right, when you look at the quality of the roads, you don't necessarily I have to say there are some improvements that are going on, but you don't necessarily see dramatically improved freeways because all of a sudden we've had hundreds of millions of dollars more revenue collected.
And you know what everybody also points out, Aaron, is that sometimes you don't know which road is which road anyway. So, I mean, this tax could go to fixing a road, and you're driving over a bumpy road, which is a county road.
Right, right. No, that's true. But at least for the registration vehicle weight tax increases, those state taxes should be applied to state highways. And, there's every reason for people when they're driving over a bad highway to be upset. And that's why when it comes to voting for these bills, the purpose is often never in doubt. And the nobility of the purpose, but whether in reality that actually plays out in terms of the state actually accomplishing and implementing with that money that they accrue is always where the difficulty lies.
Okay, another real fast one before our news break at 7:30. John downtown is next. Good morning, John.
Yeah, good morning. I just heard that Sam Sloan and Gene Ward have both introduced resolutions regarding getting rid of the Jones Act restrictions, and also Malama Sullivan. My question is there any chance that any of those are going to pass, or are they dead already? I'll listen up to you.
Well, certainly anytime you see, John, some harmony between both majority and minority members, there's more chance of a passage than if it's just a minority bill or just a majority bill, because that means there's a little bit more consensus than usual. But I think to be completely realistic, when it comes to the Jones Act, there's so many in Hawaii who favor it and who may not feel that it's a bad thing, that I don't know that there's a collective feeling at the legislature that urging a repeal at the federal level, and even the prospects of that at a federal level, are on the top of mind for most people.
You know what I think is interesting? It seems to me that in the community at large, there's a lot of misunderstanding about that, and there's an awful lot of people that are highly placed in business that are really, really opposed to it. And I know it's been contentious for a long time. And some say it's contentious because at the time it was implemented, it was important. But we really don't have that many shipyards left in America because foreign countries are outbuilding us anyway. So why is it still there?
Well, I think, that's definitely the point for a lot of people. And then there's the other side of the coin of, for people who are concerned about whether or not, it's important to make sure that it stays a domestic industry. There's surrounding the Jones Act, there's always that quintessential debate of, should we protect our own, or should we just completely globalize? And that's a debate that rages in all kinds of economic sectors.
And speaking about all kinds of economic sectors, maybe we'll be hitting yours next on the program. Representative Aaron Johanson is in the House. We're talking about stuff that's in front of our legislature right now. The bills have all crossed over. There's no new legislation, but that doesn't mean some can't be dramatically changed before the actual time it hits the final table for the final vote.
AM 690, KHNR. More live hours, better talk radio. Now back to the Mike Buck Show.
You gotta love. It's called Don't Worry, Be Happy. Bobby McFerrin's like his birthday today. He's like 60, 70, 80 something already. Don't worry, be happy. Great philosophy. But a lot of us are worried and not happy because of what's going on in the big square building. However, and I think that we can look at some things optimistically. Representative Aaron Johanson's in the House. We seem to have, and I'm not sure whether it's economic necessity or social necessity, but we're getting somewhere. I mean, I think that this is a meaningful legislative session. I think that you guys are looking at things that are important, and I think that some of things that are obviously have been eliminated and are gone.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And, I think there's still some things, when I hear that song, I think I worry, but I am happy. And I'm cautiously optimistic because some of the worst things are dead, at least on the House side, which means there's less momentum, even if it crosses over from the Senate side. But there are some really historic firsts that have happened this particular session in the House that I'm really pleased to report about because I think that they're broadly applicable to everybody. One of the things that is a huge, huge deal because it hasn't happened in a long time is HB 694 is a vehicle that the House passed out specifically aimed at that attempts broad-based income tax relief across all brackets. And, we're having to wait to see what the Council on Revenues comes back with, and we're having to wait as the Senate we're going to pass out the House draft of the budget soon, and the Senate will be considering it. But there's a potential chance that we actually might be able to reduce income taxes across the board for people.
Rather than just spend the money.
Right, right. And, so to be able to actually pass out things like that, in a bipartisan fashion means that, we're trying to tackle some of the biggest issues for Hawaii. And I think at least that's more success than we've had in the past. And in one of the most meaningful ways to reduce the cost of living for Hawaii's people, so that there are, again, that notion of first fruits starting to proliferate from the legislature. And I think that's a healthy trend.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, there's another thing. I think that the digital age is making it more easy for just a commoner like me to go online and say, compare state income taxes. And all of a sudden you take a look at some of these other models of other states and say, hey, they're doing this right. And why should we have to pay, quote, the price for living in paradise? Why do we spend everything we make?
And I think one of the roles that the minority can play and that we are playing, particularly in this session, is we don't have to always just oppose bad legislation. Sometimes we can take advantage of the opportunities to propose good legislation and to make that come into effect as opposed to just always fighting back all the time. I think we definitely need to do that, but we also need to make sure that good ideas are percolating throughout the system as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes a good idea means cost more money, but, if you can really explain it to everybody and not sugarcoat it with it's going to go here, it's going to go there, but just say we got it because let's go. And by the way, if this is your opportunity to find out about, if not specific legislation, broad-term things on how to get to your representative or your state senator on some of these very, very important bills. Let's go to Don out in Kaneohe, who joins us on a fairly regular basis. Good morning, Don.
Morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Mike and Representative Johanson. I just wanted to know that, good morning. 13 years ago on March 25th, there was a terrible accident involving my father. He was going to the 442 reunion, and he was run over by a fellow veteran in the parking lot at the Sheraton Hotel.
Oh, my goodness.
By an elderly veteran, and his friend and him passed away. Got hit very badly by that driver. It's an elderly driver. He was in his 80s. Mike was just touching about this elderly people still driving and having accidents. I don't want to see that happen again. Has there been any bills been proposed to help people who are seniors to have them take a test or whatever before they go on the road? I know the young people have been there's rules and regulations, but I don't want to take away the elder. That's their independence, but I don't want to see another a tragic accident where somebody dies.
Boy, Don, it's first of all, I'm not sure that Rep. Johanson knew that earlier in the morning we were talking about the difficulty with this 87-year-old guy on Kauai, he and his wife. And I know that the last thing you want to do, and Don, because I remember, I didn't realize that it was your dad, but I remember specifically that incident 10 years ago or whenever it was.
Yeah.
And what a sad thing it was, and what a forever sad thing it was for the poor guy that hit him.
Yeah, we forgave the driver, but
of course,
3 years later he passed on because his health just deteriorated.
Yep.
And I don't want to see that happen to anybody else.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks so much for bringing it up. And I know this is a touchy area, but this seems to be something that we sort of need to look at. Is there anything on the horizon right now? Has anybody done anything about this to your knowledge?
For the 2.5 years that I've been in the legislature, this bill has this kind of idea probably has been bantered about somewhat informally, but formally I haven't seen bills. Either restricting the age limit for drivers.
Pretty touchy, isn't it?
It is. It is, and it's a tough one. Typically, what you see more with respect to driving is requirements and regulations imposed on the younger drivers because they constitute a bigger percentage.
Well,
of the
not only that, but it's not anecdotal. Statistically, our senior drivers are involved in less fender benders than young ones.
Yeah. And it's a tough issue. It's one that I think about as my parents enter their 70s. Sure. Just what 70 through 80 and 80 to 90, and hopefully.
Here's the thing that somebody brought up, and maybe something can be crafted down the road. I notice even with myself, the last time I got a license renewal, it's for a long time. And I'm wondering if maybe for cost savings or for whatever they do this. And in actual fact, the older you get, the shorter the period of.
I think that actually might be the case. I'll double check on that. I'm not sure, but I think once you reach a certain age, I do believe that it's a shorter renewal period.
Well, isn't it weird because some people reacted this way? Look. You get pilots that got to stop flying at a certain age. You got judges that have got to stop judging at a certain age. And sometimes it should be left to the individual on a case per case because there might be an old judge or an old pilot that really needs to keep doing what they're doing.
Well, and particularly in Hawaii, we have one of the most elderly populations of all states, and a lot of people who are in good health. Some of my relatives lived till 100 and something. Now they weren't driving at 100 and something, but they were still driving at 80 something.
Okay, during the break, Representative Aaron Johanson and I were talking about some of the things that went away. And I think that a number of bills, like, for instance, the plastic bag bill, the soda tax bill, the 1 cent for education bill, these became very hotbeds of discussion because they had an immediate wallet impact.
Right.
Are those generally the bills that people respond to the most?
Yes, they are, because people generally respond to the bills that they understand the most, which is helpful. Sometimes some of the most insidious tax and fee increases are the ones that are in a 50-page bill that are some insurance recodification that most people know the average person is not going to go out there and read. Yeah. So, I'm thankful that at least a lot of these taxes are easily digestible by most people, and it's easy for them to say, you know what, just don't tax my soda or don't tax my single-use checkout bag.
Yeah, and that because it has an instant re-jerk,
and you can see it right away
to the wallet. Right. Now, there's something else. I know that because of outcry and outrage that the PLDC was disbanded.
Correct.
But there looks like there's a bill, the PLD repeal bill, is still there. But what a lot of people are concerned about is they're apparently in other legislation sort of regurgitating it and bringing it up in a different fashion. How do we look for that?
Well, you can look for it in a number of ways. I mean, a version of repeal has passed out of both the Senate and the House, and repealing the Public Land Development Corporation as it exists now is definitely something that has broad resonance across both chambers of the legislature. But, what you see in the Senate is you see a bill that specifies, certain projects. You see there's a 21st century school bill, which I'm not so sure is a reincarnation of the PLDC, but some of my minority colleagues believe it could be. And that's the thing I think that you started out the segment with that all the listeners need to remember. Unfortunately, sometimes the legislature is a world of possibilities. Yeah. Anything that could be, and it shouldn't always be that way, which is why people have to stay vigilant.
Somebody did ask me, and this is one of the few times that I actually taken off the air thing, because this is not today, but the other day, saying, the next time you get Rep. Johanson in, you both voiced concern the other day about the gut and replace. It seems to me that sometimes that they happen almost at the 11th hour, when it's virtually impossible for input, rebuttal, or debate.
They often happen during conference.
Yeah,
which is the last few weeks. Waning days of the legislature, burning the midnight oil is often when someone says, well, we got to fix this somehow, or we need more money some way, so let's do this. And, I think the more people pay attention, the less gut and replace happens. And I try to structure my bills such that they don't have titles like relating to economic development, because I don't want it to turn into a gambling bill.
Oh, and by the way, let's reiterate that some of these bills that we're talking about, they are maybe penned by you, but they don't get gut and replaced by you. In other words, you can't blame the guy that puts in a piece of legislation. I can't believe it. Johanson did this. He said it was going to do this, but look what happened.
Right. So a prime example of that in 2012 was there was a school tax holiday for buying school supplies, like a lot of jurisdictions have. Yeah. And that got turned into a gambling bill.
Go figure. Yeah.
Right, and it wasn't. That's certainly not the intent of the introducers, but it had the right title, and it was a vehicle that was moving, and somebody hijacked it along the way.
Okay, you got a question or a comment? The number is 296-KHNR. That's 296-5467. Representative Aaron Johanson, I'll be back. We got some specific bills that were in the paper the other day regarding education, and that always is a hot spot. Okay, light them up at 296-5467. Representative Aaron Johanson is here, and we're here to talk story about the ledge as it moves into its second half of the year, second half of the season, you might say. And this is the part where it really matters because things are in or things are out as we go on. If you have something that's a specific concern to yourself and you'd like to join the conversation, you can do that. So before we go on to this education series of bills about education that I wanted to ask Rep. Johanson about. Let's go to George in Coolio, who joins us on the telephone. George, good morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, and good morning to you.
Thank you.
Interesting subject, the HB 694 about reducing taxes. I was wondering, there's two taxes that I'd like to see really reduced and brought to the public, which I'm sure we'll all agree with, is taxing on food and taxing on medicine. These are the two, to me, are slam dunk. If you can start trying to reduce something, these are the two you need to go after because that's stuff we tax. We use medicine and food all the time. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a good point, George. And what we see the wisdom in, most jurisdictions don't tax food and medicine because they're considered essential.
Exactly.
It's one thing to be taxing other purchases that are discretionary, but you need food and you need medicine to live, and that's something that most of us in the Minority Caucus are open to. I think what most of our majority colleagues rebut with is, then the general excise tax will take a huge revenue reduction. But if you're not going to, I'm willing to reduce our state coffers for food and medicine and essentials so that people can live their life and find cuts somewhere else or be prudent fiscally in other places. But I wholly agree, because this is what makes the general excise tax one of the most regressive. Is you can't escape it. Just to live your life in the most basic of ways, you still can't escape being taxed by the state. And no matter what income level you're at, whether you're on a fixed income as a senior, whether you're in the lower income bracket just trying to struggle and make it by each day, you still can't escape even for the basic necessities. So I wholeheartedly agree. And there's a critical mass of people at the legislature. We're getting to the point where there might be a critical mass of people who are willing to explore it, just because its time has come, and most jurisdictions don't tax it. So couldn't agree more.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your call.
Thank you.
There's another thing, and that is, you mentioned this before a little bit, and that is some of these bills make you feel good because they're for the environment or for this or for that. And so always when you say the word kids, anything that's hooked up to education, oh yeah, that's got to be good because we need education. We are already spending more money per capita per kid than most jurisdictions. And yet we're not testing where we need to test. And I know this is a big dilemma. What are some of the bills that are maybe good and some of the bills that maybe aren't so good that have something to do with education this year?
Well, I think one of the bills that we talked about earlier seeks to try to have more truer accounting and spending. There's a 21st century schools bill that would look at how we utilize some of the underdeveloped property or underutilized property that sits on the state land rolls for some of the schools, because a lot of the schools, particularly the older ones, were built where you had wide open spaces, and maybe looking at how we reassess those uses. And there are other things looking at charter schools and how we help support our public charter schools, which is a very successful innovation. Still going through some of the growing pains of now that they've been around and in existence for a while, looking at how to actually put in some good necessary reform. So there's a lot going on in the education field. I don't know that this legislative session we've seen some of the boldest education proposals, but there's a lot of good ones out there, I think.
There are a number of people, when you mention the development, there are a number of people that say, really, whether you're the government or a foundation or an estate or a homeowner, your land is all you got. And, that's your real big asset. There are a lot of other states, though, that have sold off state lands to accomplish certain things. Is it because that our real estate really is sort of limited here, that a lot of people are anti doing any of that?
Well, we certainly have a limited stock. We're a very land-poor state, and what's more, we have pretty stringent zoning at the county level, at least here on this island. I'm less familiar with some of the others. So it makes the pot of land that can be developed a lot smaller in comparison to places where, if you go to Texas, you can just keep expanding the city limits indefinitely.
As far as the eye can see, sort of thing. But, here there's another thing. And even though it's a pet peeve of mine, that people that are trying to grow crops, I know there's a GMO bill that we got to talk about a little bit, and I can see both sides of that. But there are a lot of people here that think that we don't have any more places that we can grow anything. And from what I understand, that's quite the opposite. As a matter of fact, there might be a lot of state land that could be used to grow crops, at least on the short term, or even on the long term. The state could get money for it, and we could use land that's not being used.
Yeah, and I think what we always have to take a look at is how is that done in a good free enterprise market friendly way. The state can do a lot of things, and it undertakes a lot of enterprises. Sometimes they don't work out because they're not really based in reality. But I think the state can be a helpful spur if it's working with the private sector to actually utilize some of its agricultural lands and utilize them well for crops that have a either high yield or low export cost, or just a high value, whether it's premium products like coffee or cacao or something else.
I was talking to somebody that said, the counties and the city, especially City and County of Honolulu, they did some pretty cool stuff a while ago when they encouraged these community gardens. And why not on a bigger scale? And in other words, say this 1,000 acres can be used by several farmers. Apply here, produce there, show that you're producing, keep your lease based on your production.
A smaller version of that, that's a great idea, is school gardens.
Sure.
Right now most schools can't actually utilize in good conscience the food that they grow because the law hasn't kept pace with utilizing those fruits and vegetables. And so there's a bill moving forward that would allow school gardens and the vegetables and the fruits to actually be consumed. And for some of our bigger schools, more ag schools, you could have it on a much broader basis. You could have more agricultural teaching attached to it.
Well, I know that just the schools in my neighborhood. For instance, there's a farmer's market at Kaiser High School, as you know, every Saturday. And there's also a few farms right behind it. How easy is that? You put your stuff in the wheelbarrow, you bring it down to the farmer's market. That would accomplish this thing. And I guess the other thing is, really quickly, the GMO concern is big. I know there's a very vocal group that really wants everything labeled. There is a bill that's going through for that, and there's also some nationally. What are your thoughts on that, or where are we going with all of this stuff, and is it something that needs to be done at a certainly a cost right now where we may not have the money?
Yeah, sure. I think, the bill that moved out of the House is a fairly innocuous one. There's not necessarily ways or enforcement mechanisms attached to the bill. It's more sort of a nod to those who feel like truth in advertising and who may just want to know. I think probably the most economically feasible way to go about it is, instead of forcing everyone to label, to actually have those people who are not producing GMO-related crops label it as a premium product. This is not a genetically modified organism. It's not GMO. Therefore, if that's something that you're looking for, you're probably willing to pay maybe a little bit more just so that you know for certain that you're not having a GMO in your system and go about it that way.
Now, Whole
Foods has actually done that.
Yeah, I was going to say there are some like Whole Foods that do that. There's also people that don't mind paying a premium if they know what it's for. But here in this time of, you're talking about economic opportunity, when you layer cost on it, and we are already struggling to have our local produce and local products compete with imports.
And there are not actually that many, I'm told, GMO products that actually are imported into the state. There are a few like cucumbers and some other things.
Okay, we are going to run out of time really quickly, but let's have the Aaron Johanson pick of the litter for right now, something that you feel particularly strong for or against?
Mm-hmm. I would say HB 694. I mean, this is our best first shot in a long time at broad-based income tax relief. And because income taxes are one of the biggest burdens that we saddle most of our people with here, that's a really exciting prospect. And it's probably one of the things that I'm proudest of the House for passing.
Okay, so we're going to take another look at that next week. Always a pleasure. You generated a lot of interesting calls this morning, and I know that's fortunately that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make people aware. Hey, you can talk to these folks pretty easily. So we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Mug.
Hello.